Great. Thank you everyone for joining our crosstalk, and we are very honored to have Christian Stein to be here, and he's from gamelab Berlin and Humboldt University to Berlin. And today he will give us a talk about his projects and some of his ideas and experience with game design and game development. So welcome, Christian.
Thank you, Skylar. Yeah. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more to our audience?
Sure, I can do that. Yes. Hello, everyone again. My name is Christian. I am one of the founders of gamelab Berlin, and also working at, as you can see here, the Excellence Cluster Matters of Activity, Image Space Material, which is the follow-up cluster of the original Excellence Cluster, Image Knowledge Gestaltung, where gamelab Berlin has been founded. My background, although I normally tend to not mention that anymore because I think the disciplinary descriptions are kind of not fitting so much anymore. But my original background is in Germanistics and computer science. But for many years, I've been focusing on game development and game research in the field of knowledge culture, and also the application of technologies around games in exhibitions for museums, for education, and stuff like that.
Yeah, thank you. So you have introduced a little bit about your background, and we're also interested in how did you start your journey with gamelab Berlin? Can you talk something about it?
Yes, of course. Back in the day, we started the Excellence Cluster Image Knowledge Gestaltung here in Berlin, which was a very weird and unconventional endeavor. We had 44 disciplines coming together in one excellence clusters. Normally people are really struggling even remembering 44 disciplines, right? That's a lot. So it has been the worldwide the biggest interdisciplinary academic research group in that sense in the time, and to my knowledge up to today, where it's really integrating knowledge from very different fields, from hard science, from humanities, from design, from technology, even a strong focus on clinical applications, and integrating designers on eye level, let's say, not to kind of design certain things that other academics and scientists have developed, or to, I don't know, make them more representable, but really to discuss the goals of scientific projects with them on eye level. So this has been the background, and in this we have been thrown into projects with people from disciplines that we didn't even have heard of before. So we call this kind of concept by now radical interdisciplinarity. It's not like the functional interdisciplinarity that you normally know, that you say, okay, I want to build a specific software, so I need an interface designer, a programmer, somebody for quality assurance, somebody for backend, I don't know. So interdisciplinarity, where people know, okay, we need each other. This was, we did not have a goal. We did not know what the others would want, what the discourses were. Even to find a common language was difficult. So these projects didn't have clear goals. They had to find them themselves. And in this, let's say, background, we realized, me and my colleague Thomas Lilge, that game is a topic that connects a lot of them, because many scientists were seeing was seeking out for a playground, a trading zone, an area where you could connect beyond your own discipline, to explain something in a playful way, to invite other audiences, and to create this space of freedom of creativity and thinking. So we thought game is probably the topic that can help with that. We started as a working group, just people dropping in and out to certain topics. And then we grew, and we started to be a project within the cluster. We had the possibility to just propose own projects and to get the structural help to do that within the cluster structure. So it was kind of a protective space. And from there, when it became a full project, we started to achieve third-party funding from outside of the cluster, getting more people on board. And in the end, we have been the only project that kind of survived the cluster and its end, and went to the Central Institute of the Helmholtz Center for Cultural Technique, where it is still settled. And we are kind of a very weird phenomenon in the academic world. We are not an institute, but bigger than a project. We are very interdisciplinary. We are highly connected to the Excellence Cluster Matters of Activity, but formally not part of it. We can basically do what we want, but of course, it is not always the easiest way to kind of be between the regular institutional boundaries. So this is kind of the story of GameLab and why we started with the topic game in this very interdisciplinary scenario.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really inspiring experience. And how many years was your experience cover from what you have described?
Yeah, we started with the first working group 2014.
Yeah.
So we have around 9 years now of working in different constellations, people coming in and out. We describe and understand ourselves as a research and development platform. That means people who kind of fit in our mindset, in our thinking, that always combines the theoretical part and the practical part of really also developing games and interventions, and not kind of not just theoretically looking at them. This combination of praxis and theory is kind of the criteria for people to come into GameLab. But then we offer a wide variety of possibilities and network inside GameLab to help projects come alive. Some projects run more or less autonomously in GameLab. Others are highly connected to the core people in GameLab. So it really depends. But the idea is that game, at least for everyone in GameLab, is the most important medium nowadays. It is something that is deeply shaping our global digital culture. It's deeply shaping our society. And our understanding is that with taking a game and play seriously in that way, we can be part of that, and we can probably contribute in a way that games are helping, that games are educating and connecting people, and also to develop a critical understanding of the power of games and probably also the problems of games.
Yeah, thank you very much for your introduction. And we have known that Christian and also with gamelab Berlin has almost 1 decade of experience with different projects. So Christian also prepared a presentation to introduce everything more in details. We look forward to your presentation, and then we can continue our conversation.
Sure, great. Thank you, Skylar. First of all, if you have any questions right to a point, please interrupt me. We are a small group, it's not a problem. I picked 3 projects as examples of what we do. But if there are others that you might have come across and want to talk about, of course, just ask me. I can also say something about all the projects. Okay, I'm trying to start my presentation. One second. No. You see full screen now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome.
All right, so yes, gamelab Berlin. First of all, I wanted to start with a citation you might know of one of the visionary fathers of looking at game from a bigger perspective. That is, of course, Johann Huizinga, who said, seit langer Zeit hat sich bei mir die Überzeugung in wachsendem Maße befestigt, dass menschliche Kultur im Spiel als Spiel aufkommt und sich entfaltet. For a long time now, the conviction has become increasingly fixed in my mind that human culture arises and unfolds in play as play. So this is kind of the mindset. Culture and games are deeply connected. Games are not just something for entertaining, something that probably children do or for relaxation. Games are in the core of our culture, and the cultural change that we are witnessing is reflected in games and even influenced by the games that we play. With this picture of game, we would not only look at digital games, we would look at game as a general phenomenon. And we normally kind of flip the perspective on different structures in society, in work, even in academics, that can be pretty good described through game mechanics, right? You can look at a lot of structures and identify game mechanics in, for example, academic careers. How does that game look? What are the mechanics? What is well designed? What probably not so well? Where is it fun? Where is it interesting and social? And where does it become problematic? And so this connection from a game designer as a political dimension, you could say, with a responsibility and influence to society, this is deeply part of what we do. So first project I want to introduce is my object, it's called. This one is a game that we developed for museums. And the idea was to say, we want to create a different interface for the museum experience, in the sense of not overwhelming the visitors with thousands of objects, texts, and impressions that are kind of it's impossible to grasp that in a sense. And visitors are more and more getting to the museum, kind of trying to make the visit complete, in a way, to have seen everything, but in the end they just get tired and don't perceive anything anymore. So our idea was to create a game that is focusing from 100,000 objects. We developed that for the Humboldt Forum here in Berlin originally, within the Museum 4.0 funding, to one. And this is my object in the museum. And this app became a bit famous through the analogy to Tinder. It was called Tinder for Museums. And you can see that on the screen here a bit. So you're basically dating objects, right? The objects are kind of introducing themselves similar to the dating app. So just with a picture, with a short description that is a bit unclear, probably a bit mysterious what it means. And you would normally see a detail of the object and not the object as a whole. So you don't get all the information about it. What we want is the initial reaction. And we want to create a personal connection between the objects and the visitors in the digital game. Therefore, you can swipe left or right. Swiping left for how was it, like no, swiping left is for not interested, and swiping right is for interested. Not all the objects would match. You would also have to kind of be interesting for the object, right? So we kind of play with this metaphor here. And at some point you could get a match with an object and start a chat with it. And that was a very interesting experience writing these chats. It's like chat trees where you can select from predefined answers and therefore go into specific directions of the interactions. And we completely flipped the idea of a museum having to have an objective description, something like that. We wanted to make it as subjective and emotional as possible. So we had objects that were really grumpy, right? They were really grumpy because there's another object standing in their view and they hate that, right? Or they are very curious about the visitor, where they're coming from their own experience. What would they think about certain questions? So it was because we did not have the problem that we could possibly fall into the idea that anybody thinks, oh, the object is speaking for real. It's clear. It's an object. It cannot speak. So we could kind of free ourselves from the objective description and therefore make a completely different way of interacting with the objects. And by the way, developing these chats, these dialogues, has been a highly motivating endeavor, especially for students, for interest groups, for experts, also for the curators who finally could give their own favorite objects a voice. And there was always, we could always see a high degree of motivation of creating content for the museum and not only receiving it. So we would consider this part of game design, the chat writing, as part of the game, because it is really giving you different perspectives. It lures you into making more research about the objects, its time span, its perspectives, other objects. So it kind of gives you a task, and then you have to find your information. You have to find a personality, a tone, a narration, a format, and all that has a lot of characteristics of a game itself. Okay, so the game would continue that the object at some point would invite you to visit it in the museum space. On point 3 on the lower right, you can see the discovery part. You can see part of the map of the museum. You can visit the object, and there the second part of the dialogue starts, where we can really work with the object, like details on the object, something like, oh, something is itching me on the head. What do I have here? I cannot see it. So you would kind of lure the visitor into certain perspectives, looking at details, but from a subjective point of view, or to axis of sight and perspectives from the side of the object. Or even we played in the time when we still had the Benin bronzes in the Bode Museum with what is actually standing on the description of this object. Is there something stated that this is basically stolen goods or not, right? So we could even play with the main narrative of the museum, and yeah, we got into deep trouble with that, but it was fun. So of course the museum didn't like that. We were kind of opening a debate that at that time they wanted to kind of shut down. Yeah, but these possibilities are there. And then if you go to the museum with kind of playful attitude and Say, okay, we are the game designers here. We can design a game in a museum even against the museum, right? We do not have to tell them what we do here, because we are basically delivering a digital app, and we can offer a different narration about the objects than the museum offers it. So this is highly controversial, of course, and everything we've done so far, besides the Benin Bronze example, we did collaborating with museums, of course, and this should be the goal. But I'm saying to kind of hack this kind of communities and to bring games into areas that tell different narrations is a possibility to unfold the possibilities of games and critical discourse. Okay, so this is a very short intro to Mein Objekt. If you want to try it out, it's in many museums by now, I think around 10, and it can be played all through Germany. It's always with the content of the specific museum. It has a lot of extra functionality, like an individual collection that you can build. You can even photograph an object in the museum and automatically detect if that object has a dialogue. So it's like the image recognition part of it. You can make a selfie with yourself and the object to put it to your collection, and several things more. Yeah, this is an example how we try to create a different perspective on knowledge transmission in the museum for a target group that is probably bored after 5 minutes entering the museum. And it's by the way, last sentence to this, it's a very social app. People tend to play together, look at the dialogues, decide together how to go further, which decisions to make, and to search for the objects in the museum space.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Yes,
for
of course.
this? Yeah, because for our EU-FairPlay project, we are interested in how to apply these games to education context. So I wonder, you talk about that you have been collaborating with museums and it might be more open to the public. So
Yeah.
are there any collaborations or experience with schools in Germany that you can think of? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. With this project, we did not collaborate with schools, but with universities. So, for example, in the Bode Museum, a whole lecture has been around this. So the students would not write regular homework in the end about an object, but they would write these dialogues and they would be graded as their homework. And this has been published in the Bode Museum too, for example. With schools, not so far. I mean, we had a lot of pupils testing, but not creating dialogue so far. But it's an opportunity, so I think it is very motivating to do this kind of work instead of just writing a regular essay.
Yeah, sure. So what you have talked about the higher education also counts, because when we talk about education, it can cover from kindergarten to higher education. It is really interesting to know that you have already experience with university students. And in the future, maybe with our EU-FairPlay network, we have the schools in Germany. So might be a place where you can talk to the teachers there.
Definitely. We even made one part of the project, the so-called chat builder. This is a software that allows for a relatively easy writing of these dialogue trees, including images and choices and stuff like that. It was a crucial part of it to make the creation easy and to lower the barrier of becoming creative there. And this is also publicly available.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. All right. Direct questions to this project, or shall I continue? Okay. Next one is Singleton, the Change Gamer. This has been developed in GameLab as a game for kind of self-improvement in a world where a lot of requests from all sides are coming at the same time, right? So everyone is struggling with, for example, okay, how can I find my deep work hours for academic work? How can I keep up with my reading necessities? Then I want to learn a language. Then I want to go to the gym. Then I need to take care of my glucose levels. Then I need to, and so on, you know? So the requirements of lives are coming from all directions. Everyone is putting itself absolute, like, this is the most important thing to do. And so Singleton was developed out of the idea that it's probably not one thing you have to decide for, but give everything a tiny place in your everyday life. So it has been started as a card game, physical card game. We developed in some 10 versions of it before it became an app. And it works like every card has normally a tiny intervention that you do in real life, something that normally doesn't take more than a couple of minutes. Some are taking 30 seconds, or just, you know, something you simply change a tiny bit in your everyday life. But you cover a lot of different areas. These areas we call superpowers. And so with every card you play, you are kind of putting more power to these superpowers. And so with that, you are leveling up, you're getting new cards, new interventions, cards are repeating, you're strengthening your superpowers. And you do that without putting a lot of time into it. It's very small, we call it micro interventions that are done there. And these micro interventions help you to slowly get to know with different areas of development and to build habits in them with a low threshold. So it's a digital card game, yes, and yeah, you can play it as a team, but also have your individual profile. Sorry, this. Yes, team play is possible, and you can earn points for your superpower fields. We have also applied this in the VIR versus virus solution enabler program against the pandemic, the follow-up of the pandemic, which was one of the selected projects for the solution enabler, and developed content to kind of deal with the new pandemic situation when everything was new. People were first-time home office, didn't know, you know, a lot of uncertainty and change in everyday life. So this was one of the fields, but it is highly adaptable. It can be done with all kinds of content, can be done in organizations, individually. Right now we have a trial in a psychosomatic clinic to kind of help people to use their clinical time better and more structured and with more fun, and also have a certain little things to test and try out besides the regular program that they can kind of self-pace when it fits, get new ideas without having the huge necessity of investing a lot of time or having a huge threshold. It's something you kind of do at the side in your day-to-day. Yes, so we have yes, in around 10 versions by now. It's more with all kinds of areas we have applied it to. Okay, this was a very short introduction into this, and it is still in development. We have thousands of use cases by now, thousands of users, I think. More than 5,000 users in different content working with it, and yeah, using game mechanics, game ideas to tackle specific problems in organizations and individuals. Okay, coming to the last example, again, there could be many more, and we can maybe have a quick look at the homepage if there is other interest fields that you might have. This one is one of my favorites. It's called Wasser für Kenia VR, and we developed virtual reality experience for students in Germany to get an understanding how school and life looks and works in Kenya, in a Kenyan school. It's an interactive 360 video content that we compiled together with geography teachers to a complete teaching double lesson teaching set. It comes within a suitcase with 15 VR headsets for a class. And we are pretty proud that we could do it in a way that we would not need to send specialized personnel with it. We would not need to train teachers specially beforehand. It's ready to use out of the box. You get the suitcase in the in your school. You can order it for free. You open the suitcase as a teacher, and there is a full double lesson content ready to use, including the VR headsets. So how this works was, you could see here there is a this was done in connection to a small NGO that is developing water projects in Kenya, and these connections of how schools look in Germany, how they look in Kenya, the connection to climate change, to development aid, but also to day-to-day life was very direct here and very perceivable. And with this medium, we created experiences that were going so much deeper, were so much more intense than regular videos, that the schools participating in this program, many of them later on started to do own development aid activities in that context. For example, doing this kind of sponsor runs. That means that they are like the students are running and collecting donations from local companies and donate that as a school for a specific project. With these interventions, with these VR interventions, we could double the amount of money raised per school. So students were so much more motivated to do something after they have seen how life works there, and how climate change is immediately affecting the students there, how something like a water tank at the school can enable kids in Kenya to actually go to school and not fetch water all day for 20 kilometers or more. So these direct connections with a very strong media impact embedded in a teaching concept was really a successful connection. Yeah, this is the camera we used here. It's like a Insta360 Pro camera with 6 lenses, like the size of a head, that is creating these full-scale stereoscopic 3-dimensional 360 images. And we developed a specific app for the VR headsets running in a kiosk mode without controller, just with gaze control. Where you look is where you get additional information. And you would, with that, be able to not only visit the school and learn about it, but also find tiny elements of interest in your gaze, activate them, and learn more about it. Yeah, this is the suitcase. So we have a low-cost VR headset, Oculus Goes, in a kind of hacked kiosk mode that just works. You put it on, everything works. You don't need a controller. You don't need to set up anything. It's just by the powering on and by the distance sensor. If you put it on, you activate it. So yeah. And probably also I'm mentioning this because I'm going to Kenya again in about a month and doing the second version of it. Also, this one has been used by now by, I think, around 3,500 students in Germany. So it's and it's the first project of its kind in Europe, and it was very well achieved and very successful. Yes, so maybe that as a quick input as 3 example projects. And of course, I'm happy about your questions, comments, whatever you want to know. I'm here.
Thank you a lot, Christian, for your inspiring presentation about all of the projects, these 3 games. So I have a general question about using these games in education context. Some of the projects you already have experience, some are for the future. And you have mentioned already the power of game before your presentation, but I think it's worth mentioning again. So when you think about all of these games that you have developed and how it has been used for people to learn and to experience, what's the advantage of game compared to non-game teaching or learning?
Yeah. I mean, from a pretty abstract point of view, I would say games are artificial environments that are designed to make us feel connected, very abstractly said. So games are not necessarily for fun. Games are not necessarily for entertainment. They create a connection that kind of gives us a position in this artificial world, and this position is an active one. I'm not a passive receiver of information. I'm not just watching in that sense. I'm actively participating in it. And when a game kind of suits me, right? If a game is a game that connects to me, I will feel very alive in it, in a way, right? I can do things. And this is a very different way of learning than if you just present some information that you kind of are passively trying to remember. As it is interactive, it is kind of putting this kind of liveliness in the whole scenario between the player and the game. We normally say in English it's a bit complicated, but maybe the game is the game is not something that you kind of that runs on a medium. The game is something that happens between the player and the game system. So it is an active process. It's an exchange. And as a game designer, it's very, very interesting to see that what players make out of game systems is normally something very else than the game designer would have imagined. So the game is created by the player too. From game design, we also say the game looks back in the sense. It's the environment reacting to the player and adjusting to the player. So I would say because we want to connect to the world, and it's probably not that important if that world is the real world or a designed world, and by the way, the real is a complicated category anyhow. It's also designed probably just bad or in other interests, and at least some layers. These designed worlds that are made for players to connect and to feel alive, they motivate us. And without that kind of motivation, learning becomes really hard to do. We don't lack information anymore. We have very well curated information about whatever you can think of for free in the internet, right? It's not about access anymore as a game mechanic, you could say. Let's say 200 years ago, you would need to go to a university to get access to information, or but these times are gone. So you really need to ask, what is motivating me to do this? And of course, you can say the pressure or the necessity to receive a degree or something, but this is kind of a passive extrinsic motivation that is basically motivating you to get through it, but not to do the learning. And to really make to create that spark of interest, you need these interactive systems, and games are just the way to go there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you a lot. Others, if you have questions, feel free to do so.
Yeah, I have one question, because you mentioned it. It's not just about running on the medium, and also previously on the game Singleton, you said that it was previously a card game. So what is your opinion about the advantage of having a digital game versus an analog game, especially in regards to something like the Singleton game that you can have, or that did have, as an analog game?
Yeah. That's a very good question. I mean, maybe just as an example, I still play an analog version of that game with myself every day. The good thing about the analog version is that you can basically easily adapt. You can easily try out new ways of changing it. But of course, every activity that's coming from the game system, you have to basically do it as a player. With a digital game, you can, for example, optimize something like the next card around all kinds of criteria. You probably want the next card to represent a variety of the superpowers, not just the same again. You want the right distance of one card to reappear. Maybe you have realized the player hasn't played for 2 or 3 days, and you want to give a very easy card that's done in 30 seconds to re-engage the game. And a digital system can do that. It can integrate a lot of criteria to optimize the feeling of the game. This is what I meant when I said the game looks back. The game is also looking, how is the player playing? Maybe one example about that, there has been a time when something came up like automatically adjusting difficulty. I don't know if you still remember that. There were some games where you could just not select easy, medium, hard, or however it's called, but adjustable. And the idea, I think, was great, but it gave the players the idea of, oh, I'm not really playing the game. There's nothing to beat, because if I'm bad, the game becomes easier. And if I'm good, the game becomes harder. So I'm not beating the game. It's not a challenge. It's just, it's not very motivating. But the idea was still good. It's just like they shouldn't have called it like that, right? So there's still a motivational part in saying, okay, I'm beating that game. And still, game designers have a lot of tricks to tweak what they are representing to the gamer and what they're actually doing in the background. For example, it's a regular trick to increase health points of boss fights in the last 10%, so it really feels close, right? So the feedback is different from what's happening behind, to create a bigger sense of engagement, of activity in the game. Basically, you could say the game is cheating on you a bit, but it's doing so in respect to optimize your game experience. And this is also the difference between a game and a simulation. The simulation is trying to kind of give a model of something in the real world, again, as accurate as possible. But a game has a different purpose. A game has to design something that people want to stay in. This is the criteria of success of a game. And digital games can adapt and do these adaptations much more flexible than analog games. But it does not mean that digital games are always better. For example, also why I still, although we have the app play analog version of this game, is not only the adaptability, but also these cards. This is one example. This is the card Binet, and it's about throwing something away, right? Because it can be a digital thing or an analog thing. I can put this card behind my screen, or I can lay it on the table. I can kind of break out of the regular centers of attention and put it to the place of action itself. So there are advantages of analog as much as of digital, but when it comes to reactivity and of course measurement, right? Measuring how players play and optimizing and learning from that, there's no way around the digital.
Oh, it's very interesting. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I can also talk a bit more if you want about other games that we did. We did a lot about a lot of VR projects. We did, for example, games for dementia patients in nursing homes. We created VR games for dancers and performers on stage, merging physical and virtual movement. We did many other museum games. We just did a completely VR physical exhibition where you could walk with a VR headset through a museum. That's also why I was in Buenos Aires to bring that exhibition there, to kind of connect virtual and physical worlds. Stuff like that. So just to throw you a bit more of things that might interest you.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. And for our audiences, if you are interested in more projects that Christian has introduced about gamelab Berlin, you can check their website, and there is a whole list and description of all of the projects. And I have another question. Yeah, Christian has already sent the link there, new.gamelab.berlin. So check it out. It's really interesting. Okay. So I would like to ask another question related to our EU-FairPlay project. So one of our mission is to use game-based learning or general game-based approach to close the equity gap in education. And when we are talking about the education equity gap, we are meaning that not all the people or children are learning in a similar way. Maybe some resources are not available, or they are not motivated because of different things like gender or socioeconomic status, cultural background, or their ethnic groups or countries. All of these factors will contribute to the equity gap in education. And you have already talked about different projects, about games. So now it's more like a brainstorming session because we don't really have a clear answer to that. Do you think all of these game-based approaches might be useful to close the equity gap in education in any way?
Yeah. Again, I would say the idea of the environment to change depending on the player might play an important role here again, to say once a system, a learning system is not static, but adapting to how it is used, it can also adapt to different ways of learning, different ways of motivation. And so I think because games are in general able to do that more or less automatically once this is implemented, I think there is a great chance to create environments that really adapt to different learning styles and different motivational styles. But I would always say both, because it's not only how we learn, but also how we motivate ourselves to keep learning. And games are, I think, the one example of things that have been created that basically request a lot from us. Like they basically request a lot of creativity, problem solving, social abilities, in systems that do not have any external outcome, right? It looks like work from the outside to play a game if you don't know it. People are highly concentrated. They give the best they have in their abilities. They constantly learn and improve. They put all their emotions in there. They sometimes even cut their sleep to play more, right? And all that without getting paid, right? Just because the game motivates them to do so. They want to stay in the game. So I think with that, we have a lot of similarities with learning environments. But as much as not every game is for everyone, you have to find your games, right? Maybe I'm fascinated by a specific genre or a specific narrative style or a specific visuality. I selected a t-shirt today, by the way. I don't know if you...
Release the Hypno drones.
Yes. Anybody realizing what that is?
Not
Okay.
really.
It's one of my favorite games. This is later in that games. It's the Universal Paperclips game. I can recommend that a lot to you. It's a game basically without any graphics. It just runs in the browser or the phone as you like. And it's basically a clicker that is telling a story without a single sentence. It's just telling a story with numbers and mathematics, you could say. It's a big story about the rising of AI and the end of the world, but it's not told. There's not even a graphic showing it. It's just by these numbers. That's why I picked this t-shirt today for you, because I wanted to say this game might not be appealing to many because it doesn't have any nice graphics. It doesn't have a nice narration. It doesn't kind of lure you into the game space that easily. But certain mechanics are probably something that some people would really, really connect to, and others might not. So to find the right game that is motivating you is similar to the question to find the right environment to learn. One example about how this is done differently is you probably know the 42 school, right? 42 school? 42 school. This is a new educational concept, highly gamified. It's basically a programmer school without teachers. It's you start applying. It's for free. It has a dependence. One school here in Berlin, in Wolfsburg too. The original one was in Paris. Development of the concept was in the Silicon Valley, and the idea is to have a highly gamified educational concept where you have to collaborate with your co-students. You cannot solve this alone. The necessities are too high, and you are graded by an algorithm, right? There's nothing, nobody you can convince of anything or talk yourself out of. Either your code works or not. It's even like once the first error in your code in the tests makes everything you wrote afterwards invalid. So it really is. It's highly competitive. It's very different, and it's highly gamified. So it's a teaching concept that kind of tries to apply the real world living we have, where it's much more about using the internet, finding your own way of getting solutions, talking to your co-students, and beating against an algorithm that gives rules and tasks out, but has very strict criteria of passing. So just to give that example, there are new educational concepts out there that already deeply incorporated our digital environment, that already deeply understood that social connection, co-working, and gamified systems are the way to go. They are very successful in what they do, although it is, of course, against the established educational systems of university and school, where the teacher, the person with the knowledge, plays such an important role, right? Which is normally not even true anymore. The students, most of the time, know a lot of interesting things that the teachers don't know anything about, and that might be relevant and interesting. But still, there's this kind of we have to kind of follow the rules of the person with the knowledge, and this is, of course, you can describe this also as a game design, but probably not as a game design that is inclusive for different ways of learning, and for a non-hierarchical way of creating motivation. This is basically just to get through, but not to get in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. That's really inspiring. So what I've learned from what you talked is the motivation part of the game. It really makes our education more adaptive. And also what you talk about to create this real life environment so that our education can be more inclusive to different types of students. And in addition to that, when I thought about your introduction about the Vasa for Kenya. Yeah, so if I have no money or if I have no chance to really go to Kenya, I can use your VR set and have a real life experience. I think this is also a great way to address the equity gap in education. Yeah, especially for the people who are not really used to the standard traditional teaching environment or have no accessibility to get a real life experience. Yeah, so I think that's a really promising way.
Yeah, of course, you still need, in a way, access to technology. This is still, let's say, a threshold. But then technology is providing free knowledge to far more people already. And let's say standard technology becomes more and more available. So it's not about ignoring that there is still of course a threshold for communities and people to enter this kind of technosphere, but it's lowering, and a lot of people have access to knowledge and motivating knowledge systems by now, compared to a decade ago or something.
Yeah, thank you very much. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay, thank you a lot again, Christian, for your inspiring presentation and for the inspiring conversation with us. So I would say this is then the end of the talk today.